Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 244 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode was going to be called a number of different things. I almost called it Jelly Babies. There was a moment when I really considered making it Kiwi in Australia. And for a hot second, I thought this episode is definitely going to be called Sensitive Wee Soul. I was so close to Sensitive Wee Soul. When I decided to name it instead, Bushwacking with Justin. I greatly look forward to all of you complaining to me later that the titles have nothing to do with the episodes. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Dexcom, Dancing for Diabetes, and Omnipod. Please go to dexcom.com/juicebox or dancing4diabetes.com to find out more. There's, of course, also links in your show notes right there in your podcast player and at juiceboxpodcast.com.
All right. So my name's Justin Saunders. I'm a New Zealand diabetic, currently living with my family in Australia. I've been a diabetic since 2011, a late starter.
How old are you now?
I am 41.
Not too late. I've heard later, but that's definitely was probably a surprise, I would imagine.
Oh, very much a surprise, yes. Very much a surprise.
Any background in your family at all or anything? Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise, and to always consult a physician before making any changes to a healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin.
I think I've got a couple of family members that are diabetics, but it's never been, it's always we think they were, but we don't really know what type of diabetes they had. And my mum's got a couple of autoimmune conditions as well. So
that's very common.
Yeah, I just managed to get the diabetes version of the autoimmune rather than the other things that she's got going on.
Who made out better, you or your mom?
Oh, no, she's got that vitiligo,
okay,
skin pigment, and she's got thyroid issues. So currently for me, it's just straight diabetes.
My wife and my daughter have the thyroid, and it sucks. So, although I might coin flip the vitiligo for the type 1. That doesn't sound too bad. You said New Zealander living with their family in Australia. Originally from Australia?
No, I'm born and bred in New Zealand.
So your family moved to Australia?
No, I married an Australian girl.
Ah, okay. Now we're getting to
it. About 11 years ago. And yeah, she's, so obviously her family's in Australia, so we moved back 2 years ago to be closer to them.
I see. I
15 years, I think, in New Zealand with me.
And now it's your turn.
Yep, exactly.
Do you miss home, or are you enjoying Australia?
No, I do really miss home. Very much a home boy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a great move for our kids, at least. My wife, she's done really well in her career. We shifted on to a very small island in Sydney. And the only way on and off it is by boat. So the boys just wander. It's like in the old days. You don't get worried about them getting picked up by anybody or anything exciting like that. So we just allow them to wander and play with their friends, really.
How many people live on the island?
Good question. And the question lots of people ask, and I don't actually know the answer, but it'd be less than 1,000.
I was going to say, is it thousands, tens of thousands? It's less than 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So even if someone did snatch your children, it would probably only take you about 7 hours to figure out who had them.
Yeah, pretty much.
That really sounds like a wonderful throwback. It really must feel like it's 1950, I guess, when you do something like that.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, the only way the kids can get off is if they jump on the ferry or jump on someone else's boat.
Mm-hmm.
And one would like to think our boys are smart enough to, not do that with strangers, but remains to be seen, I suppose.
How old are they?
One turns 5 on Thursday, and then we've got a 7 and a 10-year-old.
That's really cool. Yeah. Well, listen, you'll find out how smart they are pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, they haven't let us down so far.
That's the name of your children's book. You haven't let us down so far.
That's right. Good one. I'll make a note of that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're ever writing it, I'll take a small credit. It's fine. So you moved. It sounds like you moved back. Your wife gave you some time in New Zealand. You came back to Australia. She's got business prospects there. You were diagnosed probably about 4 years into your marriage. So, can you tell me what that was like a little bit? Like, what was it like to I guess tell me your story. I guess how did you figure out you had type 1 and walk me through that a little bit?
Well, I was quite lucky, in that I was working as a what we call in New Zealand an intensive care paramedic. Mm-hmm. And I went out, or the wife and I went out to hang out with some friends, made a really sweet dessert, ate that. The next morning, got up at 4 o'clock or whatever it was to go to work, felt off, and so jumped into the back of the ambulance and just took a blood sugar. It came back at 7.5. I'm not too sure what that is in American speak, but it's at the higher end of normal. Mm-hmm. And after 8 hours of not having had anything sweet, that's a bit bizarre. So
of course,
I ended up going to the doctor a couple of days later. He did all the tests, came back and said, "There's a high chance you are." So he sent me to an endocrinologist who did the antibody blood test and a couple other things, and came back and said, "Yeah, you're type 1 diabetic, obviously in the honeymoon period." And he predicted within 5 years I'd be full-blown diabetic, and I don't think I'm quite there yet. So
interesting, because I just pulled up the conversion chart, and 7.5 is 135. They definitely say if you have a fasting blood sugar, I've always heard over 130, or I guess in your situation about over 7, that was type 1. But so you feel like you're still honeymooning now, even this many years later?
Yeah, to an extent it is. I think things are slowly now catching up with me. But like depending on if I have a very high carb meal, I don't know what it would be, but I would probably take between 7 and maybe 10 units, but 10 units would be very generous for me.
Okay.
If I went kind of more salad and meat, low carb, then I'd only be looking at like 2 or 3 units. So I feel that's probably a little bit on the lower side of what a full-blown diabetic would take. Yeah. And it's only really been in the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 months maybe a little bit longer, that I've actually upped my Lantus, and I'm now currently sitting on 6 units of Lantus at night before I go to bed.
And that was going to be my next question. How do you manage? So you're injecting?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I am.
And do you have a glucose monitor?
I do. Yep.
Which do you have? You don't. I think I looked on your Instagram. Is that the Libre?
I used to use the Libre quite a bit, but I haven't used it since Christmas. Oh, sorry, no, scratch that. I've used one sensor since Christmas, but the last 2 or 3 I've had have actually become quite inaccurate.
Okay.
And they were kind of maybe 1.5 to 2 millimole difference between a finger stick and what the Libre was saying. Mm-hmm. And I had the Meow Meow, or however it's pronounced, but that died on me, so I've just gone naturals, I suppose you could call it, and for a little while.
Dexcom's not available in Australia, is it?
The G5 is, the G5. I believe. The G6 isn't, but it's really, really expensive, and we don't get insurance coverage here for it.
Okay. All right, well, that makes a lot of sense.
It's about, I have worked it all out, and if you did it to, the letter of the law, 7 days or whatever the G5 is, mm-hmm. It was something like $4,500 a year. Yeah. For the Dexcom system, whereas the Libre, if you work it out, it was 2.5, I think.
Okay. And you were saying it could have been off by as much as 2 mmOLs. That's for people listening in America and other places. That's the difference between like a 126 and a 162 blood sugar. That would be 2. Okay, so that's significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you found this inaccuracy, which I guess led you away to something else, and then you mentioned something that I'm not even aware of. I guess something that's available there that's a glucose monitor.
I'd say it's just a transmitter. So it's a Bluetooth transmitter that sits on top of the Libre sensor, and then it transmits by Bluetooth to your phone, so it becomes a proper CGM.
And is that like an aftermarket? That's not sold by the company, is it?
No, it's aftermarket.
It's aftermarket. And then that failed on you. I see. How are you?
Yeah, when it works really well.
People have said that about me. When I work really well. So tell me something. So you've had glucose sensing technology that wasn't continuous. You've had it that was continuous, and now you don't have it at all. Do you have a preference, or are you using such a little amount of insulin it's not really causing you a problem yet?
It depends on where I'm at. Sorry.
No.
Depends on where I'm at, really.
Okay.
It's I'm kind of enjoying not having access to all that data, because I was starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by it. It's just a bit too much. I'm trying to get a new meow meow thing. I'm trying to get in contact with them to say this one's broken within the year, but their customer service isn't very good. So if I get a new one of those, I probably would use it, put the sensor back on again. But the Libre sensor here in Australia is $92.50 for 2 weeks, so it's also quite expensive.
Yeah, sure. No, I don't think people appreciate that. Well, I mean, I guess you do. I have insurance, right? So I know my stuff's covered. It doesn't cost us a bunch of money. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking, what would I pay for this if it was cash? But even, like you said, even $100 for every 2 weeks it's excessive. It's an extra cost that you very well may not have. Now, if your wife worked a little harder, because you did move home for her job. So if she,
that's right.
if she would just break her butt a little more for you, I mean, no, I'm just joking. So when you reached out to me initially, you sort of alluded to not maybe taking as good of care of yourself as you maybe wished you did at some point. Was that prior to diabetes, or something that did you mean specifically with diabetes after your diagnosis?
No, it's more specific to diabetes.
I say a word, you repeat it in your mind so that you don't forget. Dancing, 4, diabetes.com. I should go to dancingfordiabetes.com. After that, I'll check out their Instagram page and maybe even see what they're doing on Facebook. Dancingfordiabetes.com. That's dancing, 4, diabetes.com. So when you reached out to me, you sort of alluded to not maybe taking as good of care of yourself as you maybe wished you did at some point.
I don't know how your daughter goes, but with me, I kind of fluctuate depending on what's going on in my life. I can, be low carb, using very little insulin, doing exercise, and then a couple of months down the track, something happens and I'm eating high carb, using very little insulin, and sitting around home watching TV.
And your blood sugar rises, and so it depends. And it's interesting too, because I eat very specifically as well. Like, I'll go on a kick with something and have it for weeks, and then I look up and I realize I haven't eaten it in 6 months, and back and forth. And you're really talking about, like, from going to extremes, taking like really kind of quality care of yourself, to all of a sudden being like, hey, a cupcake. What if I had 3 of those?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. and so that's so you don't have any trouble when you're doing it, and by doing it, I mean, like, when you're being more careful with your intake, you don't have trouble with it, but then all of a sudden you do?
Yeah, I just, life just gets in the way, and you'll sit down and have a bag of chips. No,
I completely understand it. We were grocery shopping this evening, and so I had to have a blood test done, and it showed some numbers, and the doctor said to me, hey, it's possible you might be allergic to these couple things, but I'd like to find out by having you avoid them for 6 weeks and then retake the blood test. And I was like, okay. I said, yeah, what do you mean allergic? And he's like, you have this tiny allergen to just two things, wheat and corn. Well, Justin, wheat and corn is pretty much in everything. So he basically said you have a tiny allergy to food. And I was like, okay, well, I want to know if that's true or not. And, this kind of fast for 6 weeks will tell me. And we were at the grocery store today walking around, and I just was getting hungrier and hungrier for things I didn't even want. There was something I looked at, I don't even know if I liked it, and I thought, ooh, I would eat that right now. And I don't have the kind of, it's funny, I'm doing the fast. So obviously I have all the willpower in the world. I'm 3 weeks into it, and I'm fine. I haven't had bread. I haven't had, anything with corn in it, which is extensive. A potato chip, which God love you, who would want a potato chip? And and all this stuff. So I don't have any trouble with it. But the minute the 6 weeks are over, I'm fairly certain I'm going to eat a loaf of bread by myself. If these blood tests don't show me that I shouldn't be. And I do wonder that about myself. Like, how can I be like in one space and then go to another one? It sounds like a very similar thing happens to you. I'm sure it happens to a lot of people because it's ease, right? Like it's so much, so much stuff I looked at tonight. It was the idea that I wouldn't have to cook it, prepare it. It was just there. It was like in a bag or in a container. And I thought, look how easy that is. I could just do that right now. And this other thing sucks.
It's comfort food as well. I grew up in New Zealand. In New Zealand, it's fish and chips.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you had on a Friday night. That's what you had on the weekend. And now hot chips, I find it very hard to resist hot chips when they're sitting there. I know I shouldn't eat them because they destroy my blood sugars, and they normally arrive before I even think of pre-bolusing anything. So they're there, so you eat them, and then you suffer for the next 3 hours because your blood sugars are too high,
and you feel terrible.
You're bloated because you've just eaten a whole lot of carbs.
I wonder how much of that, as you're saying it, is being diagnosed as an adult. Like you had 33 years, right, where you didn't think twice about anything like that. So I wonder if it is that. Like don't get me wrong, Arden doesn't. Every time Arden goes to eat, she's not like, hey, Dad, I'm thinking of eating something, so we should probably pre-bolus now 20 minutes ahead of time. Like, we all kind of keep track of that. Her, I, my wife, we all kind of pay attention to it. And so everybody's helping out. But we've always thought this way. So as long as I can remember, we've thought this way. But you lived the whole life not thinking like that.
Yeah, well, when I was first diagnosed, I did spend some time kind of thinking that being diagnosed as an adult is probably harder to adjust to than being diagnosed as a child. But my thought process has changed over the years because, yes, I developed 30 odd years worth of eating habits and exercise habits and all the other habits, good and bad. But then when you're diagnosed as a child, you've then got to grow up. And you get to teenage years, the hormones kick in and your friends kick in and you've got all that pressure as well. So my thought process has now developed to, I don't think there is a good time to get diabetes.
I was going to say, there's never a good time to get type 1 diabetes.
I don't think any time is better than the other.
Right.
I think it's just all
positives and negatives to each kind of like age range.
There is.
Yeah.
There is.
I've interviewed somebody that was diagnosed in their 60s once, and they kind of spoke about, you've been through so much of your life already. Like eating was almost a little boring at some points. It was kind of easy just to make sure what they ate because they weren't thrilled to be eating all the time to begin with. And I actually have to tell you, as I approach 50, I'm starting to think about food like that. Like it's hard to get excited anymore. You said fish and chips, which sounded amazing when you said it, but at the same time, at what point do you think you have it and you just go, you know what, that was the last time. I have had this one too many times. And it makes me think of my buddy's grandmother who lived into her 90s, and we went and visited her. This is 20 years ago. She's been dead for, a quarter of a century. But we went to visit her one day at her place, and she is in her 90s, sucking down cigarettes with one hand and eating pound cake with the other hand.
Yep.
And she said she drank tea, smoked cigarettes, and ate pound cake. She didn't consume anything else. And we walked out of there, and I said to my friend, I was like, well, she'll be dead in 3 weeks. He goes, he's been eating like that for 10 years. I was like, oh, okay. And no kidding, man. She went on for a good long time still. Cigarettes and pound cake. So yeah, she just didn't have a taste for anything else at that point in her life. And I do wonder if maybe that doesn't help. And then, you'll hear people make the argument, well, if you're diagnosed sooner, you don't really know any better, so there's nothing to miss. And if you're an adult, then you should know better and maybe you have a little more control over yourself. It's all BS. It really is.
Yeah.
In the end, having to say to yourself, I'm going to eat in a half an hour, it's just not fun. Like there's nothing fun about it. I mean, there's nothing good about that. At the same time, as you're talking, what I hear is, if you pre-bolused, this would change things for you.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's about, that, whether or not it's a conscious decision, unconscious decision, but how that process goes? Put me in your shoes an hour before dinner tonight. Where are you at? Like mentally, I mean. Are you thinking about diabetes, or what are you doing?
Generally not. Generally, dinner gets served up, or, I've finished making it, and then I go, oh, that's right, I probably should take some insulin. Diabetes, especially at the moment, isn't something that's right at the front of my mind. I'll take insulin when I'm eating, or when I make breakfast, I'll take some insulin before I eat it. I generally have porridge every morning, so for me that's quite a good trigger, because I'll take insulin as I start preparing the porridge. But pretty much for everything else, I don't even think about insulin until the food's there, and then it's like, well, I probably should have done something a bit sooner.
Right. And do you know what the sticking point is for you? Like why you don't make that leap? Because you also discussed feeling like hell after your blood sugar's high and that whole thing. So, I mean, listen, I'm not judging you at all. I have, looked at a pizza and thought I should only have one slice of that. And then 4 slices later thought, I've let myself down pretty heartily here. But I'm maybe digging for myself as much as for anybody else. And I just didn't know if you had like a theory about why that happens, or why you don't make an adjustment to it. And what do you think it would take for you to kind of mindfully make that adjustment?
Just a mindset for me, I think. I think part of my problem is that I caught the diabetes so early, or what I think was so early, that I've been on the honeymoon. I haven't had to take a huge amount of insulin until recently. So I'm still in that mindset that I'm still in the honeymoon, that I don't need to really concentrate on working this thing out. Yeah. I think I've probably also got a bit of a hangover from getting very grumpy at a public diabetes specialist in New Zealand that kind of destroyed me right at the start of my diabetes career. And it's been very hard to actually adjust and really start caring about diabetes.
What did that person do, and how did it affect you? Has it happened yet? Is it summertime and you're being active or outside in the heat and your blood sugar's sort of all over the place and you're blind to what's happening, and you thought, oh man, that guy on the podcast, he was right. I should get a Dexcom. Have you had that moment? Well, luckily for you, no time is a bad time to start your life with Dexcom. If you're the parent or the guardian or the caregiver or the loved one of a person with type 1 diabetes, with the Dexcom Share and Follow features, you can see their blood sugars remotely. That's with iPhone and Android. I know that's exciting, and that's probably enough for you. You're probably like, Scott, I don't need to hear anymore. I'm gone. I'm doing it. Stop talking now. Nope. I have to keep talking. Direction and speed. Which way is it moving? How fast is it going there? There's a huge difference between an 85 blood sugar that is stable and an 85 blood sugar that's falling at like 5 points per minute. Do you want to know, am I 85 and I'm going to stay here? Or am I 85 and I'm going to be 75 in like 10 minutes? I need to know that. Did this food just miss me a little bit, right? Like, did I bolus and then I'm just going to go up a little, or is my blood sugar shooting up? I need to know. That's how I make good decisions. Those decisions begin with Dexcom. Dexcom.com/juicebox, with the links in your show notes, or at juiceboxpodcast.com. You could be living a completely different life with your diabetes very soon, and it all starts with this decision. What did that person do?
When I was first diagnosed, I went out, I did all the research. I looked for anything that may have been the cause of why I developed it. Mm-hmm. And I went out, I read the old Dr. Bernstein book. I read a couple of other books. It was all low carb. I was eating really well, feeling really good about it all. And then my diabetes nurse educator suggested that I go to this, because we've got a very, very good public health system in New Zealand. We do have private, and we do have a little bit of private health insurance, but it's nowhere near the extent that America has.
Okay.
So this diabetes nurse educator, she was in the public system. She suggested I go and see this public diabetes consultant at one of the hospitals. And so I did. And the first time I went to see him, he basically told me that I didn't need to take insulin and I shouldn't be taking insulin. And that he wanted my HbA1c wasn't high enough for him, because I had an HbA1c of 37, I think, when I first went to see him, and he wanted it up at 48 by the last time I saw him.
Okay.
And so he pretty much treated me like the status quo. I think, people in the public health system are more used to seeing the status quo, the people who really aren't necessarily interested. They see I don't want to insult or offend anyone, but especially where this guy was situated, it was the lower socio-economic area of where we were living. Mm-hmm. So, they see the worst of the worst, and they see so many people that they kind of develop this one-size-fits-all mentality, which it shouldn't be.
Right.
But that's how it is.
And so he basically looked at you and said, look, your A1C is not high enough for us to be treating you with insulin. So go back to your life. When this gets worse, then we'll tackle it?
That's pretty much, I think, what he was getting at, yeah.
Did you buy into that?
Not really. I did to an extent. I actually did go away, and I went off my rapid-acting insulin for a short time until I went and saw him next. And my HbA1c obviously had come up. And I was still taking Lantus. I was still on the basal insulin.
Okay.
And the next time I saw him, he said, yeah, your HbA1c, I think it was, 40-something, 45 or 44 or something. He said, I want it up at 48, so how about you go off your Lantus? I was like, no, there's no way I'm going off my Lantus. And, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Sorry, I just got a phone call. And I said, no, there's no way I'm going off my Lantus. And he then threatened me with loss of license and everything, because he believed that I was probably having hypo unawareness and having lots of lows when I didn't know. And obviously I was driving ambulances and things. And rightly, he was concerned that I might have a low while driving and causing an accident. I mean, that's a genuine concern.
Okay.
But he threatened to take away my livelihood by reporting me to the licensing authority in New Zealand.
I see.
So that pretty much destroyed me then and there. I'm a sensitive wee soul, I think. So I went out and had a massive amount of ice cream.
That sounds like a good idea. Listen, I might have done the same thing. So
destroyed my blood sugars some more. Mm-hmm. And then I only saw him, I think, 3 times.
Yeah.
And the last time I saw him, I went back and we had a short discussion, and I just said, look, the only reason I came today was to tell you I won't be back to see you again because you blackmailed me last time I was here.
Yeah.
And he didn't believe that he had, but, is what it is.
So while you're talking and I'm listening, I also pulled up a chart so that people can kind of understand what you were saying about your A1C. So tell me again, you went and saw him the first time, and where was your A1C at?
I think it was below 40 anyway.
Below 40.
Pretty sure.
So for people in America and other parts of the world, between a 5 and a 6.
Yeah.
So you had
there.
You had just probably on the verge of a, creeping up A1C. And where did he tell you he wanted it at?
He wanted it at least at 48.
Which is 6.5.
Yeah.
And well beyond diabetic. So, and so he thought you were having, and now do you feel like you were having any hypos that you didn't know about?
No. However, the 7 years that I've been diagnosed as a diabetic, I've had hypos, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had anything that I haven't been able to deal with. And I've always woken up in the morning, my wife's never had to jab me with glucagon or anything like that. So I'm pretty sure that that I wasn't having what he was concerned about.
Right. That's really...
and if I was, I knew how to handle it anyway.
You can help yourself, just like everybody else needs to be able to do.
Yeah.
It's a strange story. Is that... Jeez. And now that you're... Okay, so I want to try to put myself in your place if I can. So you have a strange diagnosis to begin with, because it's not like you have full-blown, oh my gosh, hurry up and get insulin. You have times when you don't need very much insulin, times when you need a little more. Never a ton. I mean, you talked about 10 units being a lot. And would you mind sharing with me your weight?
Currently, I'm 83 kgs. What's that, 180 pound or something like that?
Okay. So you're an average sized person. I mean, unless you're 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
And so, because if you were 3 feet tall, 180 pounds, I don't think that would be right. But I think that you're
that would work. No.
You're an average sized person, have an average weight, right? And you're using 10 units. My daughter weighs 126 pounds, and she'll use 10 units for a meal. So
yeah.
So you still are not using a ton of insulin, or you're eating a little lower carb at times.
Well, if I was to do 10 units, I mean, that I could probably count on one, maybe two hands that I've actually done 10 units for a meal.
What kind of a meal would
obviously,
that be?
I don't always get it right, but it would be probably a meal of fish and chips that I would consider giving myself 10 units.
Okay, so like batter plus protein plus oil plus a potato, a starch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about with my daughter as well. Like a lot of carbs like that she could use 10 units for. That's really... Your story is insane. Like, I'm having a bit of a trouble wrapping my head around it to figure out where to go next, but I'm enjoying this. So we're going to feel our way through this. When you emailed me, now it's February now. I'm obviously not great at getting these things scheduled. You emailed me in August, so 7 months ago. But 7 months ago, you said that you had found the podcast and it kind of given you maybe a jump start. Did that last for you? Or are you where are you right now, I guess?
It probably hasn't lasted as well as it was then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's really made me aware of pre-bolusing, of exercise, and pre-bolusing is probably the big one because it's not something that I was ever taught.
Sure, a lot of people.
And it was really your podcast that actually reminded me or made me have any real thoughts about pre-bolusing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd heard stuff about it previously, but it was really listening to your podcast and what everyone else says and the way that you deal with your daughter's diabetes that really kind of made me think about it and has made me keep thinking about it. I'm not very good at it, but I do, I do think about it when I'm eating or when I'm preparing meals.
So let me ask you this. So when you When you think about it, like, and you're actually accomplishing it, when you don't just think about it, but you do it, you put your insulin in before you eat, are you avoiding your spikes altogether? Are you having them smaller, or what were you able to accomplish?
It kind of fluctuated. It was a bit of everything, really. Depended on what I ate. Like, as I said, most mornings I'll have porridge, but it'll be porridge with a bit of like blueberries, with yogurt, with some mixed seeds and stuff on top. So it's reasonably carby meal.
Right.
And some days I can give myself pre-bolus if I inject before I even start preparing it. So it takes about, 15 minutes for it to be ready to eat.
Right.
If I pre-bolus, I can sometimes get away with about 5 units of insulin, and it will keep the spike down. Sometimes it even doesn't really spike much at all.
Okay.
But then some days I can prepare the exact same meal. I can take the insulin at pretty much the exact same time, and my blood sugars will just spike up.
It jumps. And when you had good, I'm sorry.
When I say spike, I mean, when I say spike, it's, it might get up to 10 or 11, which is, I don't know what that is in the conversion, but
190, 195, 200, like in that space.
Yeah. If I'm unlucky, it might get up that high.
And that's not a crazy spike, by the way, for a meal like that. Is that now? Would that number persist for hours, or would you hit it and come back again?
Depends on whether I'm wearing a sensor or not. If I'm not wearing a sensor, then I generally forget to test half an hour after I eat. I'm not a very disciplined diabetic. But if I'm wearing a sensor and I see it going up, then I definitely will hit it as soon as I can. It's generally after an hour. I'll give myself another 1 or 2 units and see what happens. But yeah, if I'm not wearing a sensor,
you don't
very
think to
poorly
test
disciplined.
again. Okay. So here's an interesting question, because you're going to meld two things that you said together now. So you said earlier that you're a little happy not to have the sensor technology right now because you felt overwhelmed by it. Did you mean that it was constantly taking up your time and your thoughts, or did you mean that it was reminding you to do the thing that you kind of wanted to forget to do?
I think it was just reminding me that it was there. Or, you just get this constant flow, a graph. It shows you how good you're doing. It shows you how bad you're doing. And it gets a bit depressing if you're not doing very well.
Okay.
With the ups and downs. And it's just, data overload. I do a lot of data work, my actual job. And I think throwing that in on top at times just might get a little bit too much for me.
It's too much. So, okay. So where are you? I'm interested to know, like, where in perfect world situation, if I gave you a magic wand and I was like, Justin, make your own reality, do you want to be more involved? Do you want to just do what you're doing and say, this is as good as I can do right now? Like, is it somewhere in the middle? Like, what would you hope for if you could just make it so?
I would prefer to be more involved. I'd like to remember. I need to start setting alarms on my phone that half an hour after eating, test your blood sugars again.
Yeah.
I'm just a very unmotivated diabetic.
Okay. So
I suppose you could.
The unmotivated diabetic. That's I'll tell you what, if it was 10 years ago, Justin, you had a blog title there. So
Yeah.
That the blogs are dying. Long live the podcast. Anyway, we have So if I said to you, we have 20 minutes left, would you want to chat more, or would you want to talk about like concrete ways to make that change for yourself? My daughter Arden's birthday is mere days away, which means she is embarking on her 12th consecutive year of wearing the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump. She got an early birthday present the other day. You know what it was? A 5.5 A1C. At this point, there are countless A1Cs in the 5s that have all come while wearing the Omnipod. And the Omnipod's available to everybody, not just to my daughter. So, maybe try it. You don't have to take any big leaps that you can't get back from. This isn't a eyes closed off the cliff situation because Omnipod has a free, no obligation demo of their product. That is right. If you go to myomnipod.com/juicebox, Omnipod will send you out a free pod to try on and wear. And there's literally no obligation. It's not like now that they've sent it to you, you have to use it. It's not like that. You could just try it on and be like, I don't like this. And that could be the end of it. But what if you tried it on and that moment led to 12 consecutive years of happiness for you the way it has for Arden? That's got to be worth a try, right? I mean, it's free and there's no obligation. And guess what? Omnipod has updated their personal diabetes manager, the little controller that you carry to run the pod. Dash is available now. So you can decide between the OG PDM or the new Omnipod Dash. It's up to you. You get to choose. Understand what that means. You try out the free no obligation demo, you decide to move forward with Omnipod, and you get to say to them, look, you know what? I think I'm going to take the Dash PDM, not the older one, or I'm going to take the older one. I like it better than the Dash, or whatever. I have options. Isn't everything choice? myomnipod.com/juicebox. So the links in your show notes or juiceboxpodcast.com. Dash over right now and check it out. If I was you, I'd likely be you. But I know that. But if I was in your situation, I would likely treat it the way you do.
Yeah.
But because I'm put in the situation of taking care of a loved one, I don't feel like I have the luxury to be laxed because it's not me. You know what I mean? Like I can treat myself poorly. I couldn't treat Arden poorly. And it really is, it's just truth. I think it's a very human thing. I think you see it all the time with people. I'm telling you, we just put up a podcast today. Episode 209 went up with a woman named Leah. She's had type 1 diabetes forever and never wanted a pump. Then the minute her son was diagnosed, she thought, that kid needs a pump.
Yeah.
And boom, put a pump on him and then got herself one. But for years prior to that, just never thought she really needed it. She said she did, and it was all aesthetic, she told me. She's like, it didn't seem sexy to her to have a pump on. And so she just didn't want to do it. The minute it was about figuring it out for her son, boom, we all have insulin pumps. And so I don't know how a person, let alone you, puts onus on something that's not in the moment real yet. Because, I mean, it'd be easy for me to tell you, you have 3 great kids, you want to be alive and see them for as long as you can. Like, that's an obvious thing, right? And you don't not think that. Everybody understands that. We all feel the same way. We've got families we want to be around for, whether we have diabetes or not. We're trying to stay alive as long as we can. We're trying to be as healthy as we can for as long as we can. And so my assumption is you love those kids. You've already had that thought. And I've done the same thing, in prior years with my weight. I thought I'd like to be a little thinner because I want to be around for my kids, right? And then I don't know what happens. Bread with butter is really good. Like that's sort of an idea. If I'm going to have a steak, why don't I put some bread with it? If I have a steak and bread, I might as well throw some shrimp on the side. And before you know it, you're having what I'm assuming is a 1,500 calorie meal with a ton of carbs in it. And you kind of forget.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not abusing myself. That's for sure.
No.
I eat reasonably healthy. Mm-hmm. I look after myself. I mean, my last HbA1c that I had was 5.7, so it's back in that range now.
And that's amazing. And that goes to what you're saying, where you think that you are very slowly. Like, there's no world where you don't have type 1, right? That it's some sort of an alternative diagnosis that they're not getting right. Have you had the protein test and the blood test to tell you for certain you have type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, I've had the antibodies test.
Good.
Which test for and they're there. So yeah, the endocrinologist I had in New Zealand was really good, and he ran me through all the tests, and he said, "Yep, definitely there." I haven't had a C-peptide to see what how much insulin I am still producing, if any. But other than that, I think I've had everything that I needed. So, yeah, as far as I know, I'm diabetic.
You just have a tough pancreas that isn't giving up. That's all.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that comes down to the endocrinologist that I had, the first one that I had, because like my GP, I went and saw him first, and he did the glucose fasting test and the tolerance test and a couple of other things, and came back and said, yes, you're diabetic. And then he sent me to this endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist checked me out, did all the blood tests and stuff, and I think my first HbA1c was somewhere in the high 40s. So what's that, the 7s or something?
Yeah, which is not
terrible.
Right.
Yeah, it's nowhere near excessive.
Right.
I know. When I was in the ambulance service, they always told us between 3.5 and 7 is normal for a normal person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not excessive at all. But as soon as my HbA1c, I think it hit 52, whatever that is, and he then said, well, let's put you on a little bit of insulin. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of doctors don't, or at least in the past, haven't gone down that road. They've just kind of gone, well, okay, let's adjust your diet, let's do this, let's do that, and insulin was the last thing that they did.
Right.
And I believe that there's a lot of research out there that says that get on the insulin faster and it will help preserve whatever beta cells you've got, and it will either slow their destruction or stop the destruction of whatever you've got left. And I think that's where I've come out on top, because I went on rapid-acting insulin and Lantus and stuff really early on in the piece.
Yeah, you're in such a weird, it's a precipice really, like, because you said, I'm on this chart, so a 50 A1C is right around 6.8. And even, what I'm seeing online is telling me that at 50, it's a suggestion of diabetes if you're symptomatic. If you're not symptomatic of diabetes, 2 tests on separate occasions are needed. Like, you're right in that odd space. It just where it's not quite all. Can I ask you which side do you hope it stays like this longer, or do you hope it just goes so it's more predictable?
I would prefer to stay like this, I think, because it's cheaper.
There you go. Less insulin, less gear, less trouble.
Yeah,
less
exactly.
worry. Yeah. So when you talk about, like, you want to do a better job, is it like with the idea in your mind that you want to get on a better regimen because you understand that it's probably not going to stay like this forever? Because I think that might be something. Yeah. I don't know if you need to worry about that.
And more understanding of, I just need to do more research and study, I think, around more understanding of insulins and how they work. I've been on the same insulin, Lantus and Nova Rapid, since I was diagnosed. I don't know whether there's anything better out there for me, but that would be something that would be interesting to find out. I don't know what there is in Australia.
Right.
I've considered pumps in the past. And my biggest fear, not that I probably have to worry about it currently, but if it all actually does kick off and become full-blown, my biggest concern is, obviously here in Australia, we don't have such things as Omnipods at this point in time. Mm-hmm. So we have to have the tubes, and I just read the few stories you see around Instagram, online, wherever, about people waking up with horrible issues, ketones and all the rest of it, because they've kinked their pump or they've pulled out their site or whatever.
And they haven't had insulin for hours and hours. And
yeah.
And
then to top it off, I also think I have a bit of fear of missing out. There's always some new technology on the horizon that if I get a pump now, then it's 4 or 5 years before I can get the next one. It's going to be something better in the next couple of years, I'm sure.
Justin, we've had a lot of really interesting looks into your psyche so far tonight. This is fun. Because I always say, like, to keep up with technology, when technology demands it. When a great leap is made, move with it. But if it's not a great leap, stick with what works. But you don't want to ever look back and think, oh gosh, I'm using something that nobody uses anymore. That if somebody was diagnosed today, they would never be given what I have. You don't want to be that far out of it. But it's interesting how you think about that. The idea of, like, you'd have like technology envy and not be able to move on. You think that would bother you?
Yep.
That's really something. I like you a lot, Justin. I'm glad we're doing this. Well, you are, I mean, I agree with your assessment that I think if I was you, I'd prefer for my pancreas to keep chugging along the way it is for as long as possible. And at the same time, I'm having trouble even imagining how much uncertainty you live with all the time. Because, you know what I mean? Because right now you're getting away with like an injection here, a little slow acting insulin. It's not really that big of a deal. Even a spike is 180 for you, which is of course not terrible at all. And
Yep.
and it's like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when is this going to happen? And it's been going on for a really long time. I mean, honestly,
Certainly has.
Do you think that's the tiring part of it at this point? Like just waiting?
Not something that I'd thought about, but
No.
I mean, it's a possibility.
Yeah. It just seems to me like it's something it's right there. It's just over the horizon. It's like it feels like maybe tomorrow's the day, tomorrow. And you just wonder, at least if you have diabetes and you need how much you're going to need insulin on a pretty consistent basis. It's always going to be that way. It's just that it seems doubly unfair. I mean, if that's a phrase, you shouldn't get hit. You couldn't get zinged twice with diabetes. Like, hey, you have type 1 diabetes. Like, wait, I'm 33. What are you talking about? No, isn't that a kid's thing? And then, you end up realizing it's not, and you have it, but you don't need all the insulin you think. And then the guy jerks you around, and then you go to a doctor who tells you, forget it. And you just have not had any stability in your diagnosis or your care. I would really, that would spin me. I wouldn't like that. So I can't imagine you do it either, to be perfectly honest. How is your, how much involvement does your family have with you? Do they have any, or is your wife helpful, or are you not looking for her to be? How do you handle that?
No, they don't have a huge amount. I think I think my wife now carries jelly babies or something around in her purse wherever we go on the off chance. I basically just manage myself.
Yeah.
Get told off every now and then if I have to sneak away and treat a low because I've taken too much insulin for what I've eaten. But no, it's pretty much on me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wouldn't imagine otherwise. You're at that age where it would be a strange thing to just suddenly, and it's not like you have a ton of, like you said, you're not having a lot of lows. You don't need, I wouldn't see where you would need a ton of support, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, I don't know if you can put somebody in charge of being like, make one of those kids the pre-bolus kid. Just take the oldest one and go, look, every day, a half an hour before dinner, it's your job to come to daddy and say, hey, it's half an hour till dinner.
Well, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll line one of them up.
It would be nice if they,
one can be pre-bolus and one can be 30 minutes after eating.
It'd be nice if they earned their keep a little bit. And by the way, I've looked up jelly babies.
Just bring me my slippers.
The little one. I mean, you don't want to put too much on the little one right away. I just looked up jelly babies because I didn't know what they are, and they seem like gummy bears covered in powdered sugar without the granular sugar on top of it.
Well, they're basically just gummy bears. What my wife's carrying around.
Oh, good for them.
But with that transmitter thing that I had, it also had an app on my phone that my wife had the same app on her phone so she could follow, because one of the concerns that I did have about living on an island is that there's no way to get off the island except by boat. And if something was to happen while I was at home, I had a significant low, and I was here with the kids because my wife, she's a nurse. Mm-hmm. So she was working night shifts and stuff up until a couple of months ago. And so, overnight, if something had happened, then she had the readout on her phone.
Right. Yeah, I love the idea of being able to share your blood sugar with somebody. I was thinking, and I meant to say it earlier and I didn't. The Dexcom G5, you're right, has a sensor life of 7 days, but it can be restarted when it ends.
Yeah, it can.
And so you maybe could, but the problem is it's it's sort of catch as catch can after that. You don't know if you're going to get, 2 more days or another week. And some people are like, I get 3 weeks, but I never got that much with my daughter. I don't think. I think we got into 2 restarts a couple of times. And I was just thinking that maybe, I don't know, maybe having that data, taking another shot at having that data might be valuable. But I don't know. Like, I mean, everyone's different. I've definitely heard people say exactly like you, like, I couldn't look at it. It was too much.
I tried the G5. I think I had 2 sensors when I was back in New Zealand, because after the, got to think of the polite term for him, but after the public consultant had his go at me, I went back to my private endocrinologist, and he said, well, the first thing we're going to do before we even look at doing anything with your license is that we're actually going to see what your sugars are doing. So he hooked me up with the public diabetes service, and they gave me a G5 sensor to use for a week, and then I managed to convince them that they just give me another one for another week. And so, I mean, that was really good, apart from I kind of thought having to do finger sticks to calibrate it was
counterproductive.
Kind of strange, considering it was supposed to read my blood sugars, but
Yeah, I hear you. And the new one is, I have to admit, it is nice. It's, not having to do the finger sticks is definitely a bonus. I mean, any involvement, and back to your original point, I guess, any involvement that you can take away with diabetes, to me, is great. The less I have to think about it during the day, the better. But I will say this, and I know you've probably heard this if you've been listening. I think that once you kind of get to a rhythm with the pre-bolusing and the following up, I actually think that, at least for me, it has been, and for my daughter, less actual time involvement every day than the opposite. Like I know it's tough to remember to do something, but at least those moments are a split second or, a couple of minutes to do this thing to stop hours of something else from happening. And I've always tried to think of it that way, because I hear you. I mean, I wish everybody knew me better. I'm not the poster boy for for planning ahead, and so it doesn't come naturally to me to think about it either. And I get better at it as I go, but I've also found ways around it. And because of having sensor technology and being able to see Arden's Dexcom, if I miss a pre-bolus, then I do something I call over-bolusing. So if it was something, if it was something that was going to take 5 units, excuse me, but I couldn't get it in time, well, then I would just bolus the 5 units for the food, plus insulin for the rise that I know was going to come, plus the number and having to get back down again. And if you kind of over bolus, I've heard people call it a super bolus. If you do that, you can crush the spike before it comes, and it doesn't cause a low later. That's the kind of stuff that you can. I think it's difficult to learn without seeing the sensor. Or wanting to test incredibly frequently afterwards. Which nobody wants to do either. I mean, in the end, obviously, Justin, you're an adult. You'll do whatever you want to do. But I do genuinely believe that, in the simplest way of saying it, an ounce of prevention, right? Like just a little bit up front stops a lot from happening later. And you might not find that. I don't know. But I am interested to find out how you go with this. I hope we keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would really like to. Now, I have one question to ask you. You have an Instagram account.
I do have an Instagram account. It's not a very popular one, but it's there on Instagram.
but you do. But I can't tell if it's funny. You don't put your face on frequently.
No.
But at one point, there was a silhouette of a rather handsome man. And then there was joking that this person was in great shape. And I'm like, is this actually Justin, or is it a picture of someone else and they're joking about it? Are you willing to tell me?
I can't remember the photo. Probably was me. And it was probably a very sarcastic,
it's
a very sarcastic thing. But
I just think it's fantastic that you have an Instagram account where I can't 100% tell if it's you or not. I think that indicates well done, in my opinion. So I don't know if the kids think about it that way, but I thought it was spectacular. So let me find, and you've hurt yourself recently, haven't you?
I did. Yep.
ACL? Did you have a surgery?
Yeah, I ruptured my ACL at the start of December and had the surgery nearly 4 weeks ago now, I think.
That's terrible. It painful, I'm assuming?
It is at times. Kind of fluctuates. It feels really good, and then it'll get hurt a bit more. And nighttime's really the problem, I find. I can get a good 4 hours sleep and then wake up, and the leg will be a bit achy, and it just keeps me awake.
Yeah.
It's that intense ache. It's not really sore, but it's that ache that's just really irritating.
Mm-hmm.
I said to my wife this morning that I had to go down and try and sleep on the couch because it's quite hot here in Sydney at the moment. So we had the fan going overnight, and just the noise of the fan, I wanted to throw it out the window because my knee was just irritating me so much.
Yeah. How is it on your blood sugars, the surgery and the pain and all that? Does it affect you greatly?
I think the pain might affect me a little bit because my blood sugars seem to be, when I get up in the morning, they seem to be increasing a little bit, even without actually eating.
Yeah, it's pretty common, I think.
But it's actually, I've been a little bit unwell for the last couple of weeks as well. So my blood sugars have actually been probably quite stable, I think, the last couple of weeks. But it was interesting. It's the first major surgery, you can call an ACL, a major surgery that I've ever had. So it was interesting being in hospital. I stayed a night in hospital with my diabetes, and the hospital I was at just really didn't know what to do with me.
That is a common occurrence. I don't think it matters what country you're in. They're not good at managing type 1 and insulin in a hospital setting. They leave you really high and treat it like an afterthought, which of course is just terrible for healing. The higher your blood sugar is, the slower you heal. So
yeah, I just managed. I was only in there for a night and just managed all my own stuff. But not long after my surgery, I had a junior doctor come into my junior doctor come into my hospital room, and he was like, "What's your normal diabetic regime?" So, well, I normally take between 3 and 6 units of insulin per meal, depending on what I'm eating.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, well, that doesn't work for this chart. So
for this chart,
what do we put down?" Like, oh, look, just put down 6.
Yeah, you write down whatever you want, and I'll take care of it. How's that sound?
Yeah, exactly.
So I almost, I had a person from Australia who will be on the show, wanted me to come down and do a day-long Bold with Insulin conversation. And
yes, I just saw that on Facebook. She was trying to fundraise or something for it.
Yeah, and she just it didn't work out. It was a lot of money that would have needed to be raised to haul my carcass all the way to Australia. But we tried really hard to get somebody to back it, like a company to back it. But the problem ends up being is that most of the companies I have a relationship with don't sell a lot of products in Australia. So there's not a real big calling for Omnipod to do marketing in a country where they can't sell an Omnipod, although they do really seem like they are working towards it. But I was just really touched that you have no idea how many people listen in Australia and New Zealand. The downloads there they overwhelm me every time I take a look at them. I'm pleased that everybody enjoys the show. So for those people, they're going to hear an accent finally that they can understand a little better instead of my.
Yeah, I don't know what sort of accent I've got at the moment. Sure, it's going to be a mix of Australian and New Zealand, so they might be a bit confused at times.
That's excellent. Can you tell me? We're up on an hour, and I am going to let you go, but I wanted to. I want to say something very American to you for a second. What's the greatest difference between Australia and New Zealand, like living from place to place?
Do you want to go diabetes related?
No, I just in general, like what's, if I was going to move and what's the selling point for New Zealand versus the selling point from Australia? Like what's great about living in both places?
Australia's, if you like the warmth, well, where I am in Sydney, New South Wales, it's a very warm, sunny place. That I think the days of sun probably outweigh the days of rain, so it's quite nice from that point of view. For me, I think I'll always be a New Zealander, and New Zealand. It's just an amazing country. Everybody's just so much more relaxed. We have. I'm very much a justice-driven person. So New Zealand's I think, is quite a lot more. I'm probably going to upset a lot of Australians here, but it's a lot more of an accepting country than Australia is.
So a little more liberal it's more liberal, sexuality, preference, stuff like that.
Yeah. Race, culture, whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. There's still, racism in every country, but I find the differences have been quite stark between the two countries in that respect.
That's interesting.
But just, the sceneries, when I met my wife, I was here in Australia working as an outdoors instructor. When I first came over, I was like, the scenery here is not very good because it's a lot of gum trees, it's a lot of greys and browns and, everything else. And it's like, it's not very good. But then as you spend more time here, you understand, you kind of get to understand that it's got a beauty of its own. Those greys and those browns produce something that produces quite really nice scenery.
Right.
Whereas New Zealand's a lot of greens and browns and, kind of more vibrant colours than Australia. And New Zealand's a lot smaller. Where I grew up, we could go to the snow in 2.5 hours, to the beach in 45 minutes. We could go bushwalking in like 10 minutes. We could go to a city in like half an hour. I was born in a small town.
Okay.
So the closest city was about half an hour, 45 minutes away. So it's just very small, compact. And yeah, I don't know. I just love it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it sounds, I mean, both places are places I'd love to see, but you describe a love for New Zealand that's hard to ignore. Plus, you just named the podcast episode because this one will definitely be called Bushwalking with Justin. And because that is a phrase I've just never heard before in my entire life.
You may want to be careful which countries your podcast goes out into. You say bushwalking.
Well, we'll see. I really liked it, I have to tell you.
What do you I think Americans, it's just hiking. I could throw the other one out there that you may have heard if you've talked to any New Zealanders or had anything to do with New Zealand, and that's tramping.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like finding a loose woman to me.
Yeah. It's the same as bushwalking and hiking, but gotcha. I don't know where it came from.
No kidding. And so you said you've been sick recently. Is it like and you've coughed a number of times, which I'll edit out so most people won't hear, but is it a chest cold or have you just had an illness that's been hanging on you?
It's just of illness. I had a week of nausea and then I've had a week and a bit of this dry cough and fevers and stuff. So
that sucks.
Is what it is.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And what right now it's winter here, so you're in summer now. You said.
Yep.
In what month do you turn towards? Like, do you get a fall or do you go right into winter months, or how does the transition happen?
Here in Australia, there's probably not too much of an autumn or a fall. Mm-hmm. It just kind of gets colder. Like winter here in Sydney, it's not significant. You might get the odd day where you get into single digits.
Okay.
Or at least last winter, there wasn't much in the way of single digit temperatures. It was actually quite a warm winter. Obviously, other parts of Australia, as you go further south, they have the ski fields and stuff that get a bit colder up in the mountains and things. But I think here in Sydney, there's probably not a huge transition between summer and winter.
Yeah, there's less.
In New Zealand, you noticed it a bit more.
There's less and less here. I'm on the East Coast, and there. I mean, I don't want to sound like an old person, but when I was growing up, I felt there was a real delineation between winter, spring, summer, fall. Like you could feel the transitions. And in this week alone, and the temperatures might mean little to you, but it's going to snow here in the next day or so. So it's going to be below 32 degrees 0 for you. And 3 days later, it's supposed to be 65 degrees outside. So
really?
I just don't, it's all over the place. So I was really interested in that. What month does winter come for you? Like, when do you think of winter starting?
Probably May, maybe.
Okay. So just
somewhere around there.
Just as our spring is is rolling along.
Yeah.
So, well, that's incredibly interesting. I'm thrilled that you were able to do this, and I appreciate you reaching out.
I'm glad we could do it now.
So for people who are listening and don't know, Justin and I kind of banged into each other at a lucky time where he was available and I was, because we had it planned for 1 a.m. his time, which would not have been fun for him. So this is much better. I'm really glad this worked out like this.
Justin, oh my.
Yeah, you more than me. I was just going to be up a little early in the morning, which wasn't really bad at all. Justin, thank you for coming on the show and being so open and honest. Thank you to Omnipod, Dexcom, and Dancing for Diabetes for supporting with your advertising. Thank you guys for considering the advertisers to support the podcast. It's the circle of life. Learn more at juiceboxpodcast.com or in the links in your show notes about all of the advertisers. And guys, we are so close to the 1 million download celebration beginning. It's coming. One last thing. It was my birthday last week, and I put up a post on social media basically saying, it's my birthday. Get me something for my birthday. Here's what you can get me. Share the podcast with somebody else. I wrote a short post, and I talked about some of the feedback that I had gotten just that morning. And, I just said, look at all the positive feedback coming back from the podcast. So, if you think you know somebody who would be helped by it or entertained by it or would find it useful, share it with them. That would be a great birthday present for me if you shared the podcast. So not only do people do that all the time, and I really appreciate it, but something incredibly unexpected happened. In that post, there were hundreds of replies from people who listen who've been impacted by the show. So if you took the time to share your experience with the podcast with me in one of those social media posts, either on Instagram or Facebook, please know that at some point on my birthday, I either got really teary-eyed or in one situation cried at a traffic light because of something you guys wrote. And it was much more of a birthday present than I deserved or expected. I just wanted you guys to share the podcast with other people. I just wanted you to go to other people and say, hey, this is how the Juicebox Podcast has helped me. I didn't think you were going to tell me how it's helped you. And I wasn't ready for that, to be honest. It was very impactful. Thank you very much. There'll be a Defining Diabetes episode on Friday again. And I think by next week, we should be ready to talk about the 1,000th episode celebration and giveaway. Thank you guys again so much for listening. I'll see you next week.